Today's episode is sponsored by Trading 212, the platform bringing commission-free investing to everyone. Welcome to Many Happy Returns, where we aim to make you a better investor. Your ability to manage money declines steadily after 60, yet your confidence in that ability doesn't decline at all. So mistakes get made with total conviction and go unnoticed, especially by you.
I want to know what you can do now to protect your portfolio when you reach old age. And in today's dumb question of the week, how do you raise this with your parents without it becoming a fight? All right, let's get into it. So Romin, when I asked you what we should talk about on the podcast this week, you very quickly sent me 3 suggestions, which were all very morbid. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, look, I'm not getting any younger, Michael. So, this is the kind of thing I think about.
You say you're not getting any younger. You are 57, and I am on the verge of turning 40. So we've got an 18-year gap between us. Now, I looked up the actuarial tables to see which one of us is going to live longer. Now, the gap is doing me some favors here. So, unfortunately, there's an 85% chance you go before me, Romin. Though, if it's any comfort, your life expectancy is actually longer because you've already survived an extra 18 years. So you're scheduled to live to around 82.3 years, whereas I am only averaging 80.5.
I've got to say, that doesn't fill me with joy.
But here's a question. What are the chances that both of us will be alive in 10 years?
I think what will be surprising is if it's lower than you'd expect. So maybe 60%, something like that.
89% chance we'll both make it through the next 10 years. That's pretty good, right?
Oh, brilliant.
And 67% chance that we'll both be alive in 20 years. Now, I'm not suggesting we get a joint life insurance policy here, Romin, but I found the numbers quite reassuring. But what's perhaps less reassuring is what happens in that period before you die.
Now, I've certainly noticed myself that I'm not as mentally able as I was when I was in my 20s. And I know that for a fact because I've looked back at some of the old notes I took when I was doing my physics degree, and I'm just blown away. I mean, it was incredible how good I was at physics. I could still teach A-level and GCSE without any problem whatsoever, but just to learn all of that stuff that we were being bombarded with on a daily basis, how did I do it?
Yeah, I noticed that my wife said, when I watch Romin now, I've got to up it from 1.5 speed to 1.75 speed on YouTube.
I'm slowing down. But seriously, though, I think one of the problems is that you do get this decline as you age, and you can counteract it to some extent. So you can mentally exercise yourself and stimulate yourself mentally and talk to other people, engage socially, read widely, listen to things like podcasts, which are highly informative, such as ours. But the direction of travel, unfortunately, is towards entropy and towards decline. So I think it's all about managing that and coming to terms with it.
Yeah, I saw there was a seminal paper called The Age of Reason, written a little while ago now. And they looked at credit markets and how good people are at making decisions around minimizing their fees, getting the best interest rate, not messing up balance transfers, things like that. And there's kind of 2 forces at play. Obviously, the older you get, the more experience you have. But like you say, there's a cognitive decline element as well. And they found that the peak of financial decision making, at least when it comes to these credit decisions, was age 53.
Oh no. So I'm 4 years past it already. Now, there are some confounding effects here, and the paper was published in 2009, and you could argue that financial literacy wasn't as good then as it is now, and it's based on data from US households.
I think there certainly could be a cohort effect where people who were 80 in 2009 maybe had less financial education than people who are 80 now. So maybe the differences are not purely down to aging.
Now, the most important thing to measure isn't your ability to do some weird cognitive tests. Here we're focusing on financial literacy, and there is good evidence that there's a steady decline of that after the age of 60. So your confidence doesn't decline, as we said in the intro. What does decline is your ability to make these reasoning judgments when it comes to investing.
It's a dangerous combination, isn't it? That you don't realize that your decision-making ability is starting to wane.
Plus, there's an element of not wanting to know. Do you know what I mean? If you're getting older, it's horrible to think about an irreversible decline because there's only one way it ends, right? So I think people avoid the thought of it rather than saying, okay, this is likely to happen. How do I deal with it? But in a paper called Old Age and the Decline in Financial Literacy, it showed that the average scores on these financial literacy tests roughly halve between the age of 65 and 85.
So it's not really a small effect, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. But, speak to some 85-year-olds. Some are actually still quite mentally present. Some clearly aren't. So I think there's a huge amount of variation here. And I wouldn't be too fatalistic about it. I think you can steer it, affect it by what you do.
The thing I worry about, though, is that maybe I'll still be able to do the crossword and drive and make witty remarks on our podcast, but maybe I won't be able to make good financial decisions. Does it all correlate together?
And unfortunately, the only way you'd find out is by making the mistakes, which at that point in your life is probably less reversible than when you're young as you are now.
But I think we should make the point that we're not doing a dementia episode here. Dementia is the tail risk. Some people are going to get it. It's going to be horrible. But what we're really talking about is the kind of ordinary decline that we're all probably going to experience to a greater or lesser degree.
And I think it's interesting to look at why the decline happens. What is it about the way we reason which becomes less effective? And in a paper called Do Older Investors Make Better Investment Decisions?, the research found that older investors are less effective in applying their investment knowledge and they exhibit worse investment skill. And that's because they follow rules of thumb that may not apply effectively.
I think the danger is that you learned something back in your 20s and it became kind of a cornerstone of your financial literacy, and then it no longer applies when you're older. Because some things do change. And I think the skills that potentially weaken first are the ability to process novel information, hold a complex position, and resist a good story.
Which is pretty much a checklist for what you should really master when it comes to investing. And not believing these narratives when it comes to markets, I think, is one of the most important things. Because we all read financial headlines and it's easy to be swept up by it and enter this state of euphoria when clearly we know that that's going to result in bad outcomes.
It must be a horrible thing to kind of slowly realize we can't do what we used to do. But it comes to us all, I guess. I mean, Warren Buffett, maybe the greatest investor of all time, has gone through exactly this, hasn't he? And he's stepped back from the day-to-day running of Berkshire Hathaway and handed the reins over to Greg Abel. And he even said, Greg covers more ground in a day than I would in a week, even when I was at my peak, let alone my present condition.
And I think that's an important lesson, that perhaps we shouldn't try and keep the mantle of power. We should try and hand it over to other people gently, so that if something does happen to us suddenly or slowly, then it won't be a catastrophe for the family finances.
Is one of the problems here that typically in a household, one person runs the money, or is at least primarily responsible, and maybe their partner or their children or whoever doesn't have a good picture of what assets are owned and where they're held, and why they're held?
I think that's so often the case. And I speak to people at both ends. I speak to couples, which is great because both people in the relationship are taking an active interest in their finances, so they share that risk. Whereas if I just speak to one person and I say, look, have you discussed this with your partner? I always try and ask that. They often say, well, they have absolutely no interest. They just want me to do it. They don't even want to discuss it. It's a very difficult subject to broach with them. That worries me. And I also speak to people whose partners already died, and we're essentially having to go through line by line what they've done and work out what it was they were thinking when they were buying this share or investing in this investment trust. And there's also an emotional baggage side to this, which is if they see the portfolio which they've inherited, in a sense, they don't want to destroy that legacy because effectively you're killing that person by taking away what they've done, undoing their work. So I think that is also a very difficult thing when you see inherited positions. Whereas if you feel that joint ownership, then as a guardian of the money, you won't feel so bad about modifying things.
Yeah. He held these Centrica shares for decades. I really don't want to sell down this position. I mean, come on, I get it, but it's not exactly the family heirlooms, is it?
Seriously, this is what people say to me. They say, look, if I sell this, it's one of their cherished positions. So I just don't want to sell it. I feel as if this is going against their wishes.
Yeah, it's a big problem, isn't it? What happens if the person who runs the money goes first or loses capacity first? Imagine you're the surviving spouse and you inherit this portfolio across, a dozen investment platforms. There's a spreadsheet maybe with a color coding system you can't read. No one understands it. We don't know what it's for, why it's got into this state. What would you suggest for someone in that position, other than a power hour with you?
I think you've got to bite the bullet and learn about what it is that they've got. You've just got to educate yourself. And that can be really painful because on one side, you're dealing with the grief, and that's not a mental state which is conducive to learning. It may block out the ability to learn. So the time to do this is, of course, before they pass away. But if that's not possible, then I'd say, yeah, really get to grips with how investment works. It's not immensely complex. There are a few basic things to know. Understand the average return of investments, understand diversification, understand things like safe withdrawal rates, perpetual withdrawal rates. And most important, understand the psychology of investing, that you don't sell after a fall, you don't pile into rallies. And once you've mastered those basics, I think you'll be in a much better position to take over what you've inherited.
But like you say, it's best not to get into that position. So maybe one practical tip, if you are the one running the money, is to leave a sort of in case of emergency document. Whereas if you go, it can be cracked open out of the family vault and someone can see on one piece of paper where the accounts are, what the strategy is, and maybe who to call to talk it through.
Now, the actual act of creating that one sheet of A4 may be what stimulates you to actually simplify your positions, because you'll look down this sheet and you'll think, well, why have I got this and that? This is crazy. So just reflecting on what you've got may be a helpful part of the process. And you could end up with a shorter sheet of paper, you have less stuff on it, and it may end up actually benefiting you.
I will sell those Centrica shares over my dead body, Romin. Or at least when they've made their money back. I suppose one important caveat here, though, is that this emergency document definitely shouldn't have passwords on it or account credentials or anything like that.
And there's good reason for that, good legal reasons. Because if you do share credentials, that may breach platform terms and it could void any fraud protection which is in place. So be careful about doing that. Usually, if your spouse is on the same platform as you and one person passes away, the admin, the SADmin, if you like, is much easier than if it's on a separate platform.
Yeah, potentially, though accounts in other people's names, unless there's arrangements in place legally, are going to have to go through probate and things. And you've got to remember, ISAs and SIPs cannot be jointly held. These are individual wrappers in law. So the danger, I guess, in the extreme scenario where not only does one person run the money in a marriage, but all the money is in their name, is that in any interim period after a disaster, the surviving spouse might have no legal access to a lot of the wealth while you wait for probate or application of powers of attorney.
And again, this is a conversation we often have, which is, does one person hold a lot of the family wealth in their SIP or their ISAs, and how is it split between the couple? Because there are various reasons why that's a good idea. You may split up, in which case the partition of the money is much easier and simpler. And it's the case that if one person dies, like you say, it may take quite a while to get control of the other person's money.
So I think we've rattled through some of the problems with how people might have set up their family finances and how it can come back to bite you if you experience this slow cognitive decline. In the second half, let's come on to, well, what can you actually do about it now to make that process more bearable and more safe?
Today's episode is sponsored by Trading 212, the platform bringing commission-free investing to everyone. Trading 212 Stocks and Shares ISA is the cheapest way to invest. with zero commission and one of the lowest FX fees I could find on the market. Looking to keep things simple, you could easily automate your investing with pies that allow you to rebalance your portfolio at the click of a button. Customers with Invest accounts can also benefit from the Trading 212 card, which has no FX fees and true interbank rates. Many Happy Returns listeners can claim free fractional shares worth up to £100. Just create and verify a Trading 212 Invest or Stocks ISA account, make a minimum deposit of £1 and use the promo code RAMIN, RAMIN, within 10 days of signing up, or use the link in the show notes. When investing, your capital is at risk and you may get back less than invested. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Pies and Autoinvest is an execution-only service, not investment advice or portfolio management. Automatic investing refers to executing scheduled deposits. You're responsible for all investment and rebalancing decisions. Free shares can be fractional. 212 cards are issued by Paynetics, which provide all payment services. Trading 212 provides customer support and user interface. Terms and fees apply.
Okay, so in terms of setting yourself up for this big risk that you can no longer reliably manage your own finances, there are some legal steps you can take today which will potentially make life a lot easier for you in the future.
Now, we should say you have to trust the people who you give power over your financial affairs, but you can set up a lasting power of attorney whereby you give someone else the ability to run your financial affairs without any input from you at all. So let's say you were incapacitated in some way, they could still step in and manage your financial affairs, maybe even pay bills on your behalf, and that way you could stave off any kind of financial doom without having to wait for courts to approve that authority.
Now, the first thing to note is that there are different legal systems in England compared to Scotland and Northern Ireland. I guess we'll focus on England here. Now, when it comes to lasting powers of attorney, there are two documents, not one. So there's one which is to do with health and welfare and making decisions over your treatment if you're not well. You can grant someone the authority to make those decisions on your behalf. And the second one, which is more relevant to us here, is the property and financial affairs lasting power of attorney, which does exactly what it says on the tin. You can get someone to manage your money for you and decide what happens to your assets. But the absolutely critical thing here is that both of these lasting powers of attorney can only be put in place when you have capacity. Once it's gone, once you're already deemed to be not capable of making decisions, you can't kind of retrospectively put in place this legal power.
Now, if you're wondering who decides that, when I did this for my mum, my sister and I did this for our mother when she had dementia or early stage dementia. It was actually the solicitor who had a chat with her on their own. So they sat in a room together without us in the room to judge whether she had that capacity.
And I think it can be done on a per decision basis. Like, it might not be the fact that you've lost capacity to make any decisions independently. It might be that there's just certain complicated decisions you're no longer deemed to be able to understand sufficiently.
Oh my goodness, I wonder if I'd pass those tests now. I'm slightly concerned that I wouldn't.
Oh, God help us, Roman, if you don't have capacity to make financial decisions. You definitely do. So let's just focus on this lasting power of attorney and how it actually works in practical steps. So there's a fee, £92.
And that's for each one, not for both.
Yes, so one fee for the financial one fee for the health one. And it's also quite a lengthy process. It's not instant by any means. Registration can take a couple of months or more if it's error-free, and these are complicated forms. There's also a mandatory 3-week objection period, I believe. And a significant number of applications fail because of errors on the forms. Something like 15% of applications for lasting power of attorney do not make it over the line and do not become effective. There's lots of very specific stages of the process you have to get right. Even things like the order in which the documents are signed and by who. If that's not bang on, it's going to get rejected.
Now, we got a solicitor to help us with this, and it was much more expensive as a result. but probably worth it because we didn't have any rejection of the paperwork and we were running to a pretty tight clock because mum was getting worse.
Yeah, I think it can be a few £100. Depending on the complexity of the situation, it can be more.
Now, there is a big difference between the Property and Financial Affairs LPA and the Health and Welfare LPA. The financial LPA, lasting power of attorney, can take effect immediately on registration. So that's with your consent, of course.
It's a really critical thing to understand, isn't it? That this financial one, by default, comes into effect even if you haven't lost capacity. That person you've chosen can manage your affairs, if you want them to, if you've gone away on holiday or whatever. But maybe you don't want that, and you can specify that it only takes effect if you've lost capacity to make decisions.
Now, the objection, I know people will be thinking this, is would I give my partner lasting power of attorney over my financial affairs? Do I trust them to do this stuff? So I think that's not always going to be the case, right? Many couples may not have that level of trust.
I think it's a fair concern. There obviously have been cases where people have abused that trust. But it's important to remember that under the legislation, attorneys must act in your best interests, with reasonable care and skill, and crucially, they must take account of your past wishes, feelings, and values. So they shouldn't just go completely off-piste and sell your portfolio and buy something completely random.
So if Laura went and bought lots of active funds, that would be a clear breach of what I'd normally do. But how would you prove that? You'd have to have some way of showing what your wishes are. So maybe that's part of the agreement.
Yeah, you can outline your preferences and instructions in the legal documentation, and the attorney should obviously seek to follow them. But if they don't, I guess the trouble is any corrective action is retrospective. It's not going to stop them making a decision you don't like, but there is, I guess, some recourse if someone raises an objection after the fact. Now, this is one reason, I guess, why a lot of people might appoint joint attorneys to manage their affairs, or perhaps joint and several attorneys. There's a distinction between the two, whereby joint attorneys have to come to the decision together, whereas joint and several, either of them can come to the decision. Now, it might sound safer, that first one, but you've got to consider that what happens if one of the attorneys dies or can't fulfill their duties. It can get complicated, and in the worst case, even invalidate the whole thing.
And when it comes to the wishes, I believe you can carve out certain areas. It could be things like selling a property that you don't want to get rid of, that you want to stay in the family.
Yeah, and all of these aspects of the decision can be quite complicated, I guess. So if you have got a particularly complicated set of wishes or financial situation, I think this is somewhere where talking to a solicitor is going to help.
Now, you might feel that once you've put this LPA into place, that's it, you're done, the problem's solved. But in fact, if you gradually lose your financial faculties, then it may still be a problem because the LPA is still in place, but it doesn't cover this kind of gradual decline.
I think this is an underrated problem. That if we've said that on average, financial capabilities decline from 60, you might have a period of 10, 15, 20 years where you're still judged legally capable and are making financial decisions, but you're making bad decisions and you destroy your portfolio. And maybe that's where most of the damage happens. It's not a sudden overnight, oh no, grandpa fell for a scam online. It's I've gradually whittled away my wealth.
In other words, this doesn't have a legal solution. This is more about talking to people and ensuring that they are involved in your decisions so that they can see if you're starting to do things which are maybe out of character or which may negatively impact your wealth. And you've got lots of choices here. It could be a family member that you trust, ideally one of the younger generation who's still got all of their faculties in place. But also this might be a great opportunity to pass on your knowledge about investment, what works, what doesn't, what you've learned over your lifetime to them. Or it could be a trusted financial advisor, or perhaps it could be your partner.
But there is benefit in a collaborative approach at any age, really. We're all capable of making terrible decisions.
And I find it really helpful talking through financial things with Laura. I mean, obviously, my expertise is very much on the investment side, but she's got a lot of common sense when it comes to planning things. And she'll just see things which I never would have guessed, which I just wouldn't be aware of.
Yeah, I know Laura a little bit now, and you're not going to pull the wool over her eyes. She'll keep you on the straight and narrow, Romin. But the question here, going back to lasting power of attorney, is what happens if you don't put one in place? Now, I think what a lot of people assume is that, oh, if I'm incapacitated for some reason, then my spouse can just take over for me and manage my affairs. We're married, that's what happens. When in fact, that is not what happens, at least not by default.
And the process is quite protracted and painful. The family must apply to the Court of Protection for a deputyship order. And that can take months, it can cost thousands of pounds, and that'll be in court fees, plus any kind of solicitor costs you have to pay.
And even once you get it in place, the process is more bureaucratic. So you're going to have ongoing supervision fees, and you've got to report regularly to the Office of the Public Guardian. And there's no guarantee the court will appoint who you want them to appoint to manage the money.
So while an LPA is far from perfect, I think it's better than the alternative, which is not having an LPA.
Just choose your attorneys wisely and think hard before you sign that document.
And it's fair to say that very few people do have these LPAs in place. There was research by Canada Life and Opinium. They looked at 2,000 UK adults and they found that 78% of them have no registered LPA. And that includes 77% of the over 55s. It is improving, so the direction of travel is good. The take-up of LPAs is increasing. But still, there are many people who probably should have these in place who don't.
It's even worse than the stats for wills, isn't it? And they're both important, and they solve different problems. Wills is obviously if you die, and lasting power of attorney is what happens if things go wrong before you die. But I want to take it away from all this legal stuff. We've given solicitors enough of our money over the last few minutes. Surely there are some practical things we can do with our finances to just make it easier on everyone when they have to take over.
Now, one thing we always talk about, and I talk about on my YouTube channel, which is glide paths, where you look at the proportion of equity in your portfolio and how it changes as you age. So that's your glide path for risk. But we never discuss the glide path for complexity.
Are you suggesting that as you get older, your portfolio should become progressively more straightforward?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really transformed the way I invest. And I just wish I'd done it sooner. My glide path for complexity was pretty much a cliff shape. It was very complex until I realized that was a mistake. And then suddenly it went super simple. And it's just been the best thing I ever did, I think.
The great thing is that making your portfolio simple is going to help people manage it on your behalf. But also, it's probably going to give you better returns. In investing, simplicity usually performs better than something extremely complicated.
So many things in investment are counterintuitive. You pay more in fees, you get worse returns. You have a more complex portfolio, really funky derivatives, which are really exotic, usually you end up performing worse.
So in concrete, practical steps, what are we actually talking about here when we say simplify?
Well, an important one is to consolidate platforms. If you've got 5 different platforms, 10 different platforms, because you're worried about platform risk, maybe that's overkill. Perhaps you should whittle it down to some extent.
And I think it's not just that people are worried about platform risk. It might just be that over the years, they've taken advantage of sign-up offers and have ended up with 10 different investment platforms.
And it's easy to forget one of the investment platforms. I only keep track now because I have a spreadsheet. Previously, I struggled to remember some of them, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to rediscover some of these platforms where I'd invested a bit of money just to try it out.
It's the Romin equivalent of finding a fiver in your jacket pocket, isn't it? Oh, look at all those shares I didn't know I owned. I hope I paid tax on them. So consolidate platforms. But what about within those platforms? I'm assuming we're also going to say, if we've got a sprawling portfolio with lots of overlap, consider reducing it down in terms of the number of different holdings you have.
Yeah, if you've got 100 shares, maybe you've got 20 shares, Do you really need them all? Are you going to generate outperformance with those extra shares? Probably not. So maybe it's worthwhile simplifying, or at least compartmentalizing the complexity. Have a really complex fund portfolio, but make it clear that that's what it is and size it appropriately.
And one thing I think is helpful is to set the rules now. So have a written policy document, maybe. We've talked about that one side of A4 earlier. Maybe there's another side of A4 which says why you've made these decisions. And if there's the fund portfolio in there, I don't know, 5-10% of the total, you might just say, when I'm not managing this myself, just sell the whole thing. Consider taxes, but wind it down when you can.
And that overcomes this emotional baggage that people feel when they inherit stuff. If you give them permission to sell it, then they won't feel so bad. Whereas if they sell it without your consent, they may feel guilty about it.
That's true. But I do think there is a case for getting rid of any of the stuff that requires active management the older you get. I'm not just talking about shares. Do you really want to have buy-to-lets which you're trying to manage in your 80s? I know you can hand it off to a property manager and kill your yields, but is that a good investment then? Some of these things probably don't need to be there. I'm not telling anyone what to do, but certainly from my personal point of view, I can't imagine wanting those kind of complex investments and assets as I move into my 40s, let alone my 50s, 60s, 70s.
And though I hate to say it, even things like a gilt ladder may be too much work if you're starting to lose your cognitive abilities. But that's going to be the last thing to go for me.
I knew you would say that. I've heard you say many times in the past when I've mentioned annuities that you don't want an annuity. You're going to roll your own, build gilt ladders and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, yeah, but at least with an annuity, you can't panic sell it or buy the wrong thing accidentally. It's always going to be there for you.
But the drawback with the annuities is that you can't unbuy them and they are locked in for life. So that's really the problem. If you made the wrong decision in buying one, well, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, but is it the wrong decision? They're just different decisions, right? They both are going to get you where you want to be if you manage it right. Overall, though, I think there's something to be said for favouring things that don't need decisions. At least they don't need the decision when you're older. Perhaps the best financial decision you make in your 80s is the one that you pre-made in your 50s.
Now, it's just human nature that sometimes we don't want other people to see what we've done financially. Perhaps we're embarrassed about it, or there's something wrong with it, which we don't want to share.
Or we don't want people knowing how much money we have.
That's right. So it might be a matter of trust. But usually the best way to do this is to share that information. Because within a family, between people who do trust one another, I think this kind of transparency is usually the better option.
Let's just hope you're lucky enough to be born into a family which you trust.
Now, if you did want to do one-to-one coaching, we've got a new member of the team who's Mark Howell. He's a retired chartered financial planner. He's got decades of experience with personal finance, and he's got huge expertise in financial planning and investment strategy. Now, we don't offer advice, we offer guidance and coaching, but people do find it very valuable. So if you're interested in learning more, just go to pensioncraft.com/coaching.
Okay, today's dumb question of the week is, how do you raise any of this with your parents without it becoming a fight? So throughout today's episode, we've thought about it from the point of view of, it's your portfolio, you're the one aging. But what if you're the younger generation? What do you think the best approach might be?
Now, you're going to know your parents better than we do, clearly, so there is no one-size-fits-all. But there are certain ways of approaching this which are least likely to cause umbrage and put a dead stop to any suggestion you should have one of these in place.
And here you're talking about the lasting power of attorney.
That's right.
Because the danger is you go, Dad, we need to sort out your power of attorney. And what your dad hears is, you're slipping, which no one wants to be told, do they? So I guess the first point is really you want to try and frame it somehow as a piece of admin rather than, a verdict on your parents' competence.
And I think that's likely to work because it's not a criticism of them. It's more to do with a general point about everyone. So, for example, you could frame it as something like bus risk, which is the risk you get hit by a bus tomorrow. If that happens, could mum find the money? So suddenly it's not their agency or their skill which is at fault. It's all about things out of their control, which they are trying to control to the benefit of their family.
Yeah, the question is about the bus, not your dad's brain. Or I guess you could just hang it on something else altogether. You know, you could say, one of my friend's parents had a stroke and then it took them 8 months to sort out all the accounts. It was a nightmare. Or you could say, I was listening to this great podcast over the weekend and they had a great suggestion.
You know, solicitors are going to love us for this episode, Michael.
We really should have had an affiliate link with some solicitor before we ever made this episode. But anyway, what other tactics have we got here?
Another approach is to make it symmetric. So you could be doing your own LPA and an emergency document at the same time as your parents. And you could say, look, I'm sorting out my power of attorney this month. Shall we do yours at the same time?
I would see straight through that if I was an older person. Especially if you said it in that tone of voice.
Yeah, it would trigger my curmudgeonliness if that happened.
I think it is a fair point, though. You kind of want to frame it as something that isn't being done to the older generation. It's something the whole family is doing. And it's a sensible thing to do, like having a will.
Another way of approaching it is it's part of a process. So you want to simplify the portfolio. And instead of saying, let's talk about your investments, you'd say, this is an emergency document. I've got one. It makes a lot of sense because if something happens to me, my family's going to know where the accounts are, what I own, and who to call in order to work out what's what.
I think that's a good approach. Make the smallest possible ask to begin with, which is literally make that one piece of paper, where the accounts are, what do we do in case of emergency?
And maybe even don't ask to see it, just ask them to do it, because I think it makes a lot of sense. I think very few people would say, no, that's a crazy idea.
But do ask them where they've stored it. You do need to know that. But maybe just the process of writing it all down might get them to the conclusion that this whole portfolio is too complex on their own, and then jobs are good. And
I think the timing of asking the question and the venue is very important.
what are you thinking? Christmas dinner over the turkey?
So, can I have more gravy? And have you done your LPA?
Whatever you do, don't make it confrontational.
And if 3 children gang up on you at the same time, I think it's going to put up your hackles.
Yeah, that's always going to seem like an intervention, isn't it? If all the kids come to you and sit you on the sofa. People hate interventions and they resist them. So I'm thinking it's better to go 1-to-1, low stakes. Maybe while you're doing something else, something fun, you're off fishing, whatever it is. And even if they say no, at least you've planted the seed, right? And then you can come back to it in 6 months or when they're ready. And when they're ready, it's you they'll call, hopefully.
And look, I think one of the things that people get wrong about LPAs is that they're something that should be done very close to the end of life. Whereas in fact, the earlier you do it, the more painless it is. So if you do it in your 50s, your mid-50s, your early 60s, that's probably much better than doing it in your late 70s or early 80s. But however you approach it, I think it is going to be a difficult process because ultimately you are handing over control to other people, which none of us likes. We hate to lose that agency, even if it's going to be in our mutual best interest.
Thank you for joining us for Many Happy Returns. Keep sending us your questions, no matter how dumb, at mhr@pensioncraft.com.
And do remember to check out pensioncraft.com for all the information about our membership, courses, and investment coaching options.
Many Happy Returns is a PensionCraft production, co-hosted and executive produced by Roman Nakiza and Michael Pugh. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes and is not financial advice. We do not provide recommendations or endorse any decision to buy, sell, or hold any security. We cannot be held responsible for any actions listeners may take, and investors are encouraged to seek independent financial advice.